Paul Finch, a man who measured life in billions and conversations in seconds, was about to lose the deal of a lifetime over a glass of water. He sat in the most expensive restaurant in the city, staring at a woman who held the key to his empire's future. But she couldn't hear his perfectly crafted pitch, and he couldn't understand her silence. Every passing moment felt like millions of dollars evaporating into thin air. He was on the verge of calling the whole thing a disaster, when a quiet waitress with tired eyes did something no one expected. She raised her hands, and in the silent, graceful language of signs, she saved him. Or so he thought. The truth of what she was really doing would shatter his world completely. The restaurant was called Aurelia, and it was less a place to eat and more a stage for the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables draped in heavy linen, and the air thick with the scent of truffle oil and ambition hummed with the low murmur of power brokers and old money. For the staff, it was known by another name, the Gilded Cage. Beautiful on the outside, but a place of relentless pressure within. Amelia Rosewood knew the pressure better than anyone. At 24, she moved through the glittering dining room with an efficiency that bordered on invisibility. A ghost in a crisp black uniform, refilling water glasses before they were empty, clearing plates the second a fork was set down. She was good at her job because she had learned to observe everything and expect nothing. She saw the nervous tick of the young man proposing to a woman far more interested in her reflection in the silverware. She saw the subtle handoff of a manila envelope between two politicians pretending to discuss fine wine. She saw the loneliness in the eyes of the wealthy widows who ordered for two. Tonight her focus was on Table 7, the most coveted booth in the house, currently occupied by Paul Finch. Amelia knew the type. She'd served dozens like him. He wore a suit that cost more than her car, a watch that could pay off her student loans, and an expression that suggested the entire world was a minor inconvenience. He hadn't made eye contact once, communicating through curt gestures and clipped commands to his harried assistant, who hovered nearby. "The Wi-Fi here is archaic," he'd snapped, not looking up from his phone. "Tell the manager I expect a dedicated line next time, and make sure the Rinaldi file is updated in the shared drive. Now!" Paul Finch was a titan of the tech industry, a self-made billionaire who had clawed his way to the top with a combination of genius intellect and brutal pragmatism. He saw people as assets or obstacles, conversations as transactions. Emotions were liabilities, inefficiencies to be engineered out of the system. And tonight's transaction was the most important of his career. He was here to finalize a partnership with Dr. Evelyn Reed, the enigmatic founder of Helios, a revolutionary company specializing in bio-integrated assistive technology. Reed was a legend, a visionary who had vanished from the public eye years ago, communicating only through carefully worded press releases. Landing this meeting had taken Paul's team 6 months of relentless effort. The Helios merger wouldn't just make him richer, it would make him a legacy. It was the keystone of his entire 5-year plan. "She's 5 minutes late," Paul muttered, his thumb scrolling furiously through market data. "Unprofessional." His assistant, a young man named Ben, swallowed nervously. "Her people said she might be a few minutes behind, sir. Traffic from the airport." Paul didn't respond. He simply tapped the face of his platinum watch, a silent, damning judgment. Amelia approached the table, her water pitcher poised. "More water, sir?" she asked quietly. He waved a dismissive hand, his eyes still glued to the screen. "Just make sure the table is perfect. My guest is important." The word hung in the air, weighted with meaning. Important. As if Amelia, the staff, and everyone else in the room were not. She said nothing, just filled his glass with a steady hand and retreated. From her station by the service bar, she continued to watch. She saw Ben, the assistant, wringing his hands, saw the tension in Paul's jaw, the relentless, nervous energy coiling in him. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a conquest. 10 minutes after the reservation time, the hostess led a woman toward table 7. Amelia tilted her head, curious. This was not the power-suited executive she had imagined. The woman, perhaps in her late 50s, wore a simple but elegant grey dress. Her hair was a cascade of silver, and she carried no briefcase, only a small leather clutch. But it was her eyes that held Amelia's attention. They were bright, intelligent, and constantly moving, taking in every detail of the room, with a calm, penetrating gaze. The hostess gestured to the table. The woman smiled and nodded. Paul, finally looking up from his phone, stood up, his own practiced charming smile clicking into place like a key in a lock. "Dr. Reed, I presume," he said, extending his hand. "Paul Finch, an absolute honor to finally meet you." Dr. Evelyn Reed looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. She smiled warmly again, nodded, but said nothing. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she sat down, her gaze sweeping over the table, setting her expression serene. Paul's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He dropped his hand, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, before being replaced by professional poise. "Ben," he said without turning, "get Dr. Reed a drink." "Champagne." He looked at Dr. Reed, raising his eyebrows in question. She simply watched him, her pleasant expression unwavering. "Perhaps she didn't hear you, sir," Ben whispered, leaning in. "I'm speaking perfectly clearly," Paul hissed back, his patience already wearing thin. He leaned forward, speaking slowly and loudly as if to a child. "Would you like a drink?" Dr. Reed's smile tightened just a fraction at the corners. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a small notepad and a pen, and wrote something down. She slid it across the table. Paul picked it up. The note read, "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Finch. I am deaf. Please don't shout." The blood drained from Paul Finch's face. The deal of a lifetime, the keystone of his legacy, was sitting opposite him, and he had no way to speak to her. From across the room, Amelia saw the carefully constructed mask of the billionaire crack, revealing the raw panic underneath. And in that moment, she knew she had to do something. Panic was an unfamiliar sensation for Paul Finch. It was an inefficient, messy emotion he'd long since purged from his system. Yet here it was cold and sharp in his chest. His mind, usually a supercomputer, processing a dozen variables at once, was now a blank screen with a single blinking cursor of doom. Death. His first instinct was to blame someone. Ben. His whole team. "Did you know about this?" He seethed under his breath, his back to Dr. Reed. "Sir." Her file just said she was private, reclusive. No one mentioned. Ben stammered, looking utterly terrified. "Useless," Paul snapped. He forced the plastic smile back onto his face and turned to Dr. Reed. He pulled out his phone, his mind racing. "Okay, problem. Solution." He quickly typed into a notes app. "My sincerest apologies. I was not aware. My assistant can text your phone if you'd like to communicate that way." He slid the phone across the table. "Doctor." Reed read the screen, then shook her head gently. She wrote on her notepad again. "I prefer not to spend important meetings staring at a screen. It feels impersonal." Paul felt another jolt of frustration. Impersonal. His entire empire was built on impersonal, screen-based communication. He was losing control, and he hated it. He tried again, typing rapidly. "We can reschedule. I can arrange for a certified ASL interpreter. It would be no trouble." Dr. Reed read his message. This time, she didn't write back right away. She looked at him, her gaze analytical, as if she were studying a flawed piece of code. Then she wrote, "You have 15 minutes of my time, Mr. Finch. You wanted to talk. Please begin." It was a checkmate. She was testing him, pushing him. She had given him an opening, and he was failing spectacularly. He could feel the multi-billion-dollar partnership slipping through his fingers like sand. The entire restaurant seemed to fade away, the pressure zeroing in on this single, silent table. From her vantage point, Amelia watched the disaster unfold. She saw Paul's frantic typing, Dr. Reed's patient but firm composure. She saw the desperation in Paul's eyes as he looked around the room, as if hoping a solution would magically appear. His gaze swept past her, not even registering her existence. To him, she was furniture. But Amelia wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at Dr. Reed. She saw the woman's posture, the way her fingers rested on the table, the subtle expressions that an untrained eye would miss. And Amelia felt a pang of something deep and familiar. It was the same look of patient isolation she had seen so many times on her own brother's face when the hearing world refused to meet him halfway. Her manager, a stern man named Mr. Dubois, would fire her in a heartbeat if she stepped out of line. It wasn't her place. Her job was to be silent and efficient. But the thought of her brother Leo sitting at a table like this being treated as an obstacle ignited something in her. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the table. "Sir, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice calm and low, directed at Paul, but positioned so Dr. Reed could see her face clearly. Paul looked up, his eyes blazing with irritation. "Everything is fine," he bit out. "Go polish some glasses." Amelia ignored him. She turned her body slightly, establishing a clear line of sight with Dr. Reed. She offered a small, respectful smile, and then she lifted her hands. Her movements were fluid, precise, and imbued with a grace that was startlingly at odds with her simple uniform. She didn't sign, "Can I help you?" or "What do you need?" She signed something more personal. Her fingers danced in the air, forming the words, "Good evening. The chef recommends the sea bass, but the risotto is my personal favorite. Welcome to Aurelia. I hope you enjoy your meal." It was a simple, standard restaurant greeting, but delivered in a language that bridged the silent chasm between the two worlds at that table. Time seemed to stop. Ben's jaw dropped. Paul Finch froze, his phone clutched in his hand, his face a mask of utter, unadulterated shock. He stared at Amelia, then at her hands, then back at her face as if his brain couldn't process the data it was receiving. A waitress. This invisible low-level employee. But the most profound reaction came from Dr. Evelyn Reed. The polite, guarded mask she had worn since arriving melted away. Her eyes widened, and a genuine, radiant smile spread across her face. It was a smile of surprise, of relief, of pure, unbridled delight. She lifted her own hands, her response quick and expressive. "Thank you. That is very kind. I haven't had a good risotto in years. I think I will trust your recommendation." Her signing was elegant with the confident flair of a native speaker. Amelia smiled back, her own posture relaxing. "An excellent choice. May I offer you a glass of Sauvignon Blanc to pair with it? It complements the saffron." Dr. Reed nodded enthusiastically. Perfect. The two women were having a complete, nuanced conversation, their hands weaving a silent dialogue in the opulent dining room. And Paul Finch, the master of communication, the titan of technology, was left on the outside, utterly and completely stunned into silence. He could only sit and watch as his waitress, a woman whose name he didn't even know, effortlessly achieved what he with all his billions could not, a genuine human connection. The silence at table 7 was no longer empty. It was charged. Paul sat motionless, a statue carved from pride and disbelief. The world as he knew it had just been turned upside down. The rigid hierarchy he lived by, billionaires at the top, service staff at the bottom, had just been rendered meaningless by a series of graceful hand gestures. His mind reeled, trying to categorize what had just happened. It was an anomaly, a statistical improbability. A waitress in a place like this, fluent in American Sign Language. It didn't compute. He felt a strange, unsettling mix of emotions, astonishment, grudging admiration, and a significant dose of humiliation. This woman, this waitress had solved a problem he couldn't, and she'd done it without a shred of technology. Amelia, for her part, was acutely aware of his stare. She finished her interaction with Dr. Reed, gave a slight nod, and was about to retreat to the kitchens to place the order, when Dr. Reed signed again, a questioning look on her face. "Please stay," she gestured. She then looked at Paul and slid her notepad over to him. She wrote, "Mr. Finch, it seems we have found our interpreter." Paul read the note, then looked at Amelia. It was an order, not a request. He was being told that the success of his billion-dollar merger now rested on the shoulders of an employee he hadn't even deemed worthy of eye contact. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low and strained. "Amelia, sir," she replied, her gaze steady. "Amelia," he repeated the name, feeling foreign on his tongue. "Dr. Reed would like you to stay. To translate." He couldn't bring himself to say interpret. It felt like ceding too much authority. Mr. Dubois, the manager, was already gliding over his face a thundercloud. He had seen a waitress linger too long at a VIP table, and his internal alarm bells were screaming. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Finch?" he asked, his voice oozing professional concern, while his eyes shot daggers at Amelia. "Miss Rosewood, your station." Before Amelia could apologize or retreat, Paul held up a hand. "There is no problem. Miss Rosewood is assisting me. She will be staying." Dubois' eyes widened in confusion, but he knew better than to question a guest like Paul Finch. He gave a curt, baffled nod and backed away, leaving the three of them in a bubble of surreal tension. "Please sit," Paul said to Amelia, gesturing to the seat next to him. It was a move that went against every fiber of his being. Amelia hesitated. "Sir, I can't. I'm working." It was Dr. Reed who insisted, her hands moving with gentle authority. Amelia translated her signs aloud for Paul. "She says nonsense. Tonight your work is here, with us. Please." Amelia, caught between her boss's wrath and the request of these two powerful people, slowly slid into the plush leather booth. The fabric felt alien. From this vantage point, she could see the entire restaurant, watching them, a sea of curious and judgmental eyes. And so the most bizarre meeting of Paul Finch's life began. He would speak, his voice stiff and formal, laying out the strategic advantages of the Helios merger. Amelia, listening intently, would then turn to Dr. Reed, her hands transforming his corporate jargon into the flowing visual poetry of ASL. Then Dr. Reed would respond, her expressions and signs full of insight and sharp intelligence. Amelia would then translate her signed responses back into spoken English for Paul. Very quickly, Paul realized something profound. Amelia wasn't just a simple machine of translation. She was a bridge. She conveyed not just the literal words, but the intent. When Paul's pitch sounded too aggressive, Amelia's signing softened the edges, presenting it as confident, not arrogant. When Dr. Reed expressed a concern, Amelia's spoken translation carried the weight of her thoughtful hesitation, not just the clinical words. At one point, Paul was explaining the projected profit margins. "We anticipate a 400% ROI within 5 years by streamlining your distribution networks," he said. Amelia translated. Dr. Reed watched, then signed her reply. "Doctor," Reed asks, Amelia said, turning to Paul, "what your company's policy is on accessibility for your own employees." She asks how many of your top executives are from the disabled community. The question hit Paul like a physical blow. He didn't have an answer. He stammered, "We are, of course, an equal opportunity employer. We comply with all federal regulations." Amelia translated his weak, evasive response. She didn't editorialize, but the simple, honest relaying of his words laid them bare for the corporate non-answer they were. Dr. Reed's expression was unreadable. She signed again. "She says," Amelia voiced, "that Helios is not just a company. It is a mission. Her technology is designed to empower people the world has overlooked. She is not interested in a partner who sees compliance as a goal. She is looking for a partner who shares her vision." The power in the room had completely shifted. Paul Finch, the buyer, the conqueror, was now the one being interviewed. Doctor. Reed held all the cards, and her unlikely interpreter, Amelia, was the one dealing them. He wasn't speaking to Dr. Reed anymore. He was speaking through Amelia. And in her presence, his usual tactics of intimidation and pressure were useless. He was forced to be direct, to be honest, and he was failing. He looked at Amelia, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, but also the sharp intelligence within them. She wasn't just a waitress. She was poised, articulate, and possessed a skill that in this moment was more valuable than all the algorithms his company had ever written. Who was this woman? The question echoed in the silent space of his mind, a space usually filled with numbers and strategies, now occupied by a single stunning mystery. As the meal progressed, the dynamic at the table settled into a strange rhythm. Paul, humbled and off balance, began to shed his corporate armor, forced to rely on Amelia's quiet competence. He found himself watching her hands as much as he watched Dr. Reed, mesmerized by the silent language that flowed between them. It was a world he never knew existed, operating on principles of empathy and clarity that felt alien to his own. Dr. Reed, seeming to sense the shift in him, guided the conversation away from business. Through Amelia, she asked about his life, his motivations beyond money. The questions were simple, yet they disarmed him completely. She asks what you were passionate about as a child before you built your empire. Amelia translated. Paul was taken aback. No one had asked him a question like that in 20 years. He thought for a moment, a flicker of a long-forgotten memory surfacing. I liked taking things apart, he said, the admission feeling strange. Old radio's clocks. I wanted to see how they worked, how all the little pieces fit together to make a whole. As Amelia translated this, Dr. Reed smiled a genuine, warm smile. She signed back. She says she understands, Amelia relayed. She sees the human body in the same way, a complex machine that sometimes needs a new part to work perfectly. It was a moment of pure connection, a bridge built between two brilliant minds, facilitated by the waitress between them. Paul felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. But the real revelation came when he in turn grew curious. "Ask her," he said to Amelia, his tone softer now, "how she became so successful, how she built Helios in an industry that is so vocal." Amelia relayed the question. Dr. Reed's expression grew thoughtful. She began to sign her movements, telling a story. She says, Amelia began her voice, taking on a narrative quality that the world is built for hearing people. Every alarm, every announcement, every conversation is a wall. For years she felt like she was on the outside looking in. But from the outside you see things differently. You see the flaws in the design. You see the cracks. Helios was born from those cracks. She didn't want to just break down the walls. She wanted to build a better door for everyone. As Amelia spoke, Paul saw a shadow of personal feeling cross her face. There was an empathy in her translation that went beyond mere words. "And you, Amelia?" he asked, surprising himself with the direct question. "How do you know this language so well?" "It's more than just a class you took in college." Amelia paused, her hands resting in her lap. For a moment she seemed to retreat into herself. Then she looked at Dr. Reed, who gave her a slight encouraging nod. "My younger brother Leo," Amelia said, her voice quiet but clear. "He was born profoundly deaf. He's 12 now." Suddenly her story unfolded. It wasn't academic. It was a life lived. She spoke of learning to sign before she could properly read, so she could tell her little brother bedtime stories. She described the frustration of watching him struggle in a school system, not equipped to handle him, the fierce protectiveness she felt when other children would mock his silence. "His voice is in his hands," Amelia said, a powerful, simple statement that resonated in the quiet atmosphere of the restaurant. "He is the smartest, funniest person I know. But most people never get to see that. They just see the silence. They see the obstacle." The word obstacle hung in the air, echoing Paul's own initial thoughts about Dr. Reed. He felt a profound sense of shame. He hadn't just misjudged a business associate. He had fundamentally disrespected a person's entire existence, an existence Amelia lived and fought for every single day. His mind flashed back to his own brother Daniel. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. Daniel was an artist, a free spirit, who Paul had always derided as unfocused and inefficient. He'd tried to fix Daniel, to mold him into a businessman, to make him more like himself. When Daniel refused, Paul had cut him off, labeling him a disappointment. He saw his brother's passion not as a strength, but as a weakness. He had treated his own brother as an obstacle. The revelation was staggering. In Amelia's story about Leo, he saw a mirror to his own failings. Her fierce love and advocacy for her brother stood in stark contrast to his own arrogant dismissal of Daniel. He had been so busy building an empire of things that he had let his own family crumble into ruin. He looked at Amelia, this waitress, who earned in a year what he spent on a weekend, and saw a strength and richness of character he couldn't possibly buy. She wasn't just translating words. She was a living testament to a world of connection he had deliberately walled himself off from. The foundation of his carefully constructed life, built on ruthless efficiency and emotional detachment, was beginning to crumble. And it was all because a waitress decided to speak with her hands. The rest of the dinner was a blur for Paul. The pretense of a business negotiation was gone, replaced by something far more human. Guided by Amelia, he and Dr. Reed talked for another hour. They spoke of technology not as a tool for profit, but as a tool for dignity. He found himself speaking with a raw honesty he hadn't accessed in years, admitting the flaws in his company's culture and implicitly in himself. He wasn't performing anymore. He was confessing. When the coffee was served, Dr. Reed finally turned the conversation back to the deal. She signed a long, thoughtful message to Amelia. Amelia turned to Paul, her expression serious. "Dr. Reed thanks you for your honesty," she said. "She says she will consider your proposal. She will be in touch with her decision in the coming weeks. She also says—" Amelia paused that this has been the most illuminating business dinner of her life. With that, Dr. Reed stood up. She shook Paul's hand, a firm, decisive grip this time. Then she turned to Amelia. She didn't shake her hand. Instead, she gave her a brief, warm hug, a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. Then she was gone, leaving Paul and Amelia alone at the table in a profound silence. The spell was broken. Amelia was instantly aware of her surroundings again, the staring patrons, the looming presence of her manager. She stood up quickly. "If you'll excuse me, sir, I need to get back to my duties." "Wait," Paul said, his voice urgent. He stood as well. For the first time all night, he was at a complete loss for words. "Thank you," he finally managed. "What you did tonight, He reached into his jacket, his instinct taking over. He pulled out a checkbook and a gold pen. It was his default solution to everything: throw money at it until it went away. He started to write. Amelia watched him, and a flicker of disappointment crossed her face. For a moment she thought he'd understood. But he was just like all the others. He saw a service rendered and was now offering payment. "Sir, that's not necessary," she said, her voice turning cool. "I was just doing my job." "No, you weren't," he insisted, not looking up from the check. "You did more than my entire executive team has done in 6 months. This is for you, for your trouble." He ripped the check out and held it out to her. Amelia didn't take it. She just looked at him, her quiet dignity a shield. "My brother doesn't need your money, Mr. Finch. He just needs people to see him, to listen to the words he speaks with his hands. That's not something you can buy." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with the check in his hand. He looked down at it. He had written it for $50,000, a sum he considered a trivial expense. But her rejection of it felt like a slap in the face. It was a rejection of his entire value system. She hadn't insulted him. She had pitied him. He sank back into the booth, the check still in his hand, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He had come here tonight to conquer, to acquire, to win. But instead, he had been completely and utterly humbled by a waitress who wanted nothing from him. He watched her as she went back to work, clearing tables, refilling glasses, hovering with the same quiet efficiency as before. But now she was no longer invisible to him. He saw her in searing clarity. He saw the strength she carried, the world of love and responsibility that rested on her shoulders. He knew the deal with Dr. Reed was no longer the most important thing. What mattered was the crushing realization of his own poverty, not of wealth, but of spirit. He looked at the check again. Then slowly, deliberately, he tore it into pieces. Money wasn't the answer. He needed a new language, and he had a feeling he knew who his teacher had to be. Sleep was a resource Paul Finch managed like any other commodity. He required exactly 5 hours and 45 minutes per night, optimized for maximum cognitive function. But that night, for the first time in his adult life, his meticulously scheduled rest eluded him completely. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, a sterile glass box suspended 1,000 feet above the sleeping city. Below the streets were arteries of light, a complex, interconnected system he had always prided himself on understanding, on mastering. Tonight, it all felt alien, a world under glass he could see but no longer connect with. His mind, normally a silent, efficient processor of data, was a maelstrom of chaotic images. Amelia's hands moving with a certainty he'd never felt. Doctor. Reed's analytical, disappointed gaze. The torn pieces of his $50,000 check, a pathetic and useless gesture. He tried to fall back on old habits, pulling up the Asian market futures on his tablet, but the numbers were just meaningless symbols. He opened a dozen internal reports from his company, but the corporate jargon felt like a dead language. His thoughts kept drifting back to a memory he had long ago archived and encrypted in the deepest vaults of his mind. His last conversation with his brother Daniel. It wasn't a fight. It was a verdict delivered by Paul with the cold finality of a judge. Daniel had just had his first solo art exhibit and had been glowing with pride, showing Paul a painting, a swirling, chaotic masterpiece of color and emotion. Paul, seeing only a lack of structure and a poor investment of time, had called it a worthless hobby. "When are you going to stop wasting your life and contribute something real?" he had asked. The light in Daniel's eyes had died that day, replaced by a permanent, wounded distance. They hadn't spoken since. He had seen Daniel's passion as a flaw, an inefficiency to be corrected, just as he had seen Dr. Reed's deafness as an obstacle to be overcome. Amelia's words echoed in the cavernous silence of his apartment. He just needs people to see him, to listen to the words he speaks with his hands. Paul sank into a leather chair that cost as much as a family car, the profound weight of his failure pressing down on him. He hadn't just failed to see Dr. Reed. He had failed to see his own brother. He had been living a life of profound blindness. The next afternoon, he drove himself to Aurelia. He didn't send an assistant or make a call. He walked into the restaurant during the quiet pre-service hours, feeling like an intruder. The grand dining room was hushed, the gilded cage temporarily dormant. He found Amelia in a small, sunlit alcove, polishing wine glasses with a focused, almost meditative rhythm. She looked up, and her composure was instant. A wall of professional neutrality went up in her eyes. "Mr. Finch, did you forget something?" "Yes," he said, his voice raw. "My decency." He stood awkwardly for a moment, the usual armor of his confidence stripped away. "I came to apologize. For the check. For my behavior. It was arrogant and dismissive. What you did was profound, and I tried to reduce it to a transaction. I'm sorry." Amelia placed a glass on the rack, her expression unreadable. She was wary. Men like him always wanted something. "Apology accepted. Is there anything else?" "Yes," he said, taking a hesitant step closer. "I am not here to offer you money. I'm here to ask you to teach me." A small, disbelieving laugh escaped her lips. "Teach you? Teach you what?" "How to polish glasses. Sign language." He stated the words, feeling heavy and important. "I want to learn." Her hands stopped moving. She turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his for the angle, the hidden agenda. "Why? So you can salvage your deal with Dr. Reed, so you can add another skill to your portfolio." Her directness was a punch to the gut. The old Paul would have been furious at such insubordination. The new one knew he deserved it. "No," he said, his voice quiet with sincerity. "The deal doesn't matter anymore. This is for me. Because last night I realized I've spent my entire life building systems for communication, but I don't know the first thing about it. Not in any way that counts." He looked at her, his desperation genuine. "Please, I'll pay for your time, whatever your rate is." He saw his mistake immediately as her eyes hardened again at the mention of money. "Stop trying to buy things," she said, her voice sharp. "My life isn't for sale." "Then don't do it for me," he countered, his mind racing for the right words. "You said your brother's name is Leo. What does he love? What does he dream about?" The question caught her off guard. Her expression softened. "He loves art," she said. "He wants to be a graphic designer. He fills sketchbooks with these incredible worlds." "My company has the most advanced design lab on the continent," Paul said, the idea forming as he spoke. "The best software tablets, rendering farms. I want to offer him a full scholarship to any design school he chooses when the time comes. In the meantime, I can arrange a mentorship with our top animation directors. This isn't a payment to you, Amelia. This is an investment in a young artist's future. It would be managed by my company's educational foundation. It's clean. All I ask in return is that you teach me what you know." She stared at him, her mind clearly at war. It was an offer that could change her brother's entire life. It was a golden key to a door she had been fighting her whole life to unlock for him. "You would really do that?" she whispered. "I will sign the papers today," he promised. And so, in a quiet corner of the city library, the most unlikely education began. The first lesson was a catastrophe of humility. Paul, a man who could command a boardroom of sharks with a single glance, was rendered inept. His large, powerful hands, so skilled at signing million-dollar contracts, were clumsy and stiff. He couldn't form a simple letter E without cramping. The fluid grammatical structure of ASL felt like an impossible puzzle. Amelia was a surprisingly stern teacher. She was patient but firm, refusing to let him get away with lazy or imprecise signs. "No, your thumb is wrong," she'd correct. "That doesn't mean thank you. It means something else you don't want to say." He'd leave each lesson with a throbbing headache and a bruised ego. The turning point came a few weeks later. Amelia brought Leo with her. The boy was all bright energy, his eyes sparkling with a mischievous intelligence that Paul was starting to recognize. Leo watched Paul's slow, laborious signing, then burst into a flurry of motion with his own hands, a grin on his face. "What did he say?" Paul asked Amelia. She laughed. "He said you sign like a robot with broken fingers, but he likes your watch." Paul couldn't help but smile. For the first time, he was being judged not on his net worth, but on the clarity of his gestures. Leo became a regular at their lessons. The boy had no filter. He would correct Paul bluntly, then show him shortcuts, the slang and nuance that books could never teach. One afternoon, Leo taught him a complicated sign-based joke. It took Paul 20 minutes to understand it, but when he finally did, he signed the punchline back to Leo. The boy's face lit up with a huge laugh, a silent, joyous explosion of mirth, and in that shared moment of understanding, Paul felt a connection more real and satisfying than any business deal he had ever closed. He was changing. His executive team noticed it. He was quieter in meetings, more observant. He listened more than he spoke. He was beginning to see the people behind the job titles. One afternoon, sitting at his vast mahogany desk, he found himself not scrolling through market data, but practicing the sign for brother. The phone on his desk buzzed, displaying an email notification. The sender was Evelyn Reed. The subject line was one word, Helios. Paul's breath caught in his throat. This was it. He clicked it open, his mind bracing for rejection. The first sentence made his heart leap. "The merger is approved." He read on his eyes, scanning for the catch, and then he saw it. but with one condition. He read the next lines twice, then a third time, the words seeming to rearrange themselves into an impossible, breathtaking configuration. Dr. Holt. Reed was conditioning the entire multi-billion-dollar deal on a single audacious personnel change. She wasn't just offering a partnership. She was orchestrating a revolution. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across his face. He looked at his own hands, the hands that were slowly, painstakingly learning a new language. He had sought out Amelia for an education, but he never could have imagined what the final exam would be. The main boardroom at Finch Enterprises was a place of immense power designed to intimidate. It was a cavern of polished mahogany and black leather, dominated by a monolithic table that felt more like a sacrificial altar than a piece of furniture. On the walls hung the imposing oil-painted portraits of Paul's predecessors, their stern gazes a constant reminder of the company's ruthless legacy. Into this lion's den, Paul walked with Amelia Rosewood by his side. She wore a simple dark grey suit, a stark contrast to the sea of expensive pinstripes, and held a leather-bound portfolio to her chest like a shield. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her expression was a mask of calm resolve she had learned from years of placating difficult customers at Aurelia. The moment they entered, a wave of palpable hostility rolled across the room. These were the company's highest-ranking executives, the titans and gatekeepers of Paul's empire, and their faces were a mixture of contempt, disbelief, and outrage. Paul took his place at the head of the table, remaining standing. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Good morning," he began, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "As you all know, we are on the verge of the Helios merger, the single most important acquisition in this company's history. Dr. Reed has approved the deal contingent on one condition. We are to create a new division, effective immediately, the Department of Accessibility and Human-Centered Design. Your new vice president heading this division is Ms. Amelia Rosewood." The announcement detonated in the room. A grey-haired man, Richard Sterling, the COO, and a man who had been with the company for 30 years, slammed his pen down on the table. "Paul, this is absurd. It's a joke. With all due respect to Miss Rosewood, she's a waitress. A waitress. What could she possibly know about corporate strategy, about P&L statements, about leading a multi-million-dollar R&D division?" Another board member, a sharp-faced woman named Margaret, chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. "The markets will crucify us. Our shareholders will revolt. It makes us look unstable, whimsical. It completely undermines the authority of everyone in this room who has dedicated their lives to this company." The chorus of dissent grew a rising tide of indignation. Paul let them speak, his gaze sweeping over their angry, frightened faces. He saw them for what they were: brilliant, but terrified of anything that didn't fit into their spreadsheets. They were the architects of the echo chamber he was now determined to destroy. When their complaints subsided, he leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "You ask what Ms. Rosewood knows," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense register that commanded attention. "Let me tell you what she knows. She knows that communication is more than just data transmission. She knows that empathy is not a weakness, but the most powerful, untapped resource in modern technology. For the past month, I have been taking lessons from her. I have been schooled in a language and a worldview that I was too ignorant to even know existed." He straightened up, his gaze piercing. "I've spent weeks being taught by a 12-year-old boy, her brother Leo, who has more insight into genuine human connection than this entire board combined. We sit in this room and talk about user experience while designing products for only one type of user ourselves. We are not just missing a market, gentlemen. We are fundamentally, willfully blind. And that blindness, that arrogance, is no longer a sustainable business model. He looked directly at Amelia, a clear and public show of support. Dr. Reed did not give us this condition to mock us. She gave us this condition as a lifeline. She saw our fatal flaw and gave us a guide. Amelia is not here to threaten your authority. She is here to save this company from its own ignorance. The decision is final. The Helios merger proceeds with her as VP. You will all give her your full unconditional support. End of discussion. The finality in his tone was absolute. The fight went out of them, replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. They had their orders, but acceptance was another matter entirely. Amelia's first months were a trial by fire. Her new colleagues treated her with a chilling condescension. She was given a cramped, windowless office laughably small for a VP. Her emails for resources were often lost in bureaucratic labyrinths, and crucial data she requested for her research was always conveniently delayed. At a major strategy meeting, she arrived to find the presentation had been accidentally moved up an hour, leaving her to walk into a room that fell silent as all eyes turned to mock her tardiness. It was a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts, designed to make her feel so isolated and incompetent that she would quit. But they had profoundly misjudged her. Amelia had spent her life advocating for a brother the world tried to ignore. She was immune to their petty corporate warfare. She didn't fight them on their turf. Instead, she built her own. She used the generous budget Paul had allocated to her and began hiring. Her team was unlike any other at Finch Enterprises. She hired a brilliant software engineer who was a wheelchair user, a data analyst on the autism spectrum, and a lead designer who was visually impaired. She brought in people who, like her, had spent their lives navigating a world not designed for them. Her department became an island of vibrant, collaborative innovation in the stagnant sea of the corporate office. Her singular focus was the company's flagship smart assistant, Aura. She brought her entire team along with Leo and several of his friends into the main design lab. For a full day, she let the engineers who created Aura watch as the group tried to use it. The failure was total. The sleek, voice-activated pillar was nothing more than a useless piece of sculpture to them. Then the magic happened. Leo, through an interpreter, signed an idea. What if Aura could see? What if it used its camera to recognize sign language? What if it could link to the home's lighting system to flash a specific color for the doorbell and another for the smoke alarm? The ideas came in a flood, a torrent of lived experience and practical genius that left the formerly trained engineers scribbling notes in awe. Amelia didn't lead from the top down. She facilitated, she listened, she translated need into function. Paul upheld his promise, acting as her unwavering shield against the corporate backlash. He also continued his lessons, his signing growing more confident each week. 6 months after her appointment at the final project review for the new Aura for All, Paul stood before Amelia's entire department. He turned to her team, his hands rising. Slowly, but with heartfelt precision, he signed, "Thank you. You have taught our company a new language. You are the future." The room was filled with silent, emotional applause, a wave of hands shaking in the air. It was a moment of profound acceptance, a validation that resonated more deeply than any bonus check could. The launch of Aura for All was a phenomenon. Tech journalists hailed it as the most significant leap in smart assistant technology in a decade. It swept the market, its new features proving indispensable not just for the disabled community, but for parents, the elderly, and anyone who had ever wished for a more intuitive way to interact with their home. The company's stock price skyrocketed, and the once skeptical board members were now falling over themselves to praise Amelia's disruptive vision. One evening, Paul was walking through the near-empty office. He passed the glass walls of the accessibility division, which was still buzzing with light and energy. He saw Amelia standing at a whiteboard with Leo and two of her engineers, all of them laughing as they sketched out a new idea. She was not the wushu, exhausted waitress he had met at Aurelia. She was a leader in her element, radiant with purpose and joy. He saw in her a better way to lead, a better way to live. He smiled to himself and turned to head home. As he stepped into the elevator, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen expecting another work alert, but his breath caught in his chest. It was a text from an unsaved number, a number he knew by heart, but hadn't called in 5 agonizing years. It was from Daniel. "Hey," the text read. "I saw what your company is doing with the new Aura project. Mum told me you've been different. I'm having a gallery show next month. If you're not too busy, I'd like it if you came." Paul leaned against the cool steel wall of the elevator, reading the message over and over. Each word was a fragile thread extending across a chasm of his own making. This was a second chance. A chance at reconciliation. A chance to finally see his brother. He thought of his journey, the arrogant tycoon, the humbled student, the man he was trying to become. He owed it all to the woman in the office behind him and the silent language that had taught him how to truly listen. With a tear tracing a path down his cheek, Paul Finch typed his reply. His fingers moving with a newfound certainty and a heart full of terrifying, beautiful hope. I wouldn't miss it for the world. In the end, Paul Finch closed the biggest deal of his life. But the victory wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the bridges he built to the silent worlds he never knew existed. Amelia Rosewood, the waitress who was supposed to be invisible, ended up changing an entire corporate emir by reminding its leader that the most valuable assets are never listed on the stock exchange. Their story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest strength is found in the quietest voices. And true communication isn't about speaking louder, but about learning to finally listen. What did you think of Amelia's incredible journey? Does her story inspire you to look closer at the hidden talents of the people all around us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, and you want to hear more tales of unexpected heroes and profound transformation, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories every week. Thank you for listening.